I'm going to survive on this small island for 4,700 years. Let's see what kind of progress we can make during that time. We begin, of course, by introducing our main character. This is Kivo. He was miraculously born at the age of 18 on the 14th of Gregory, year 1, seemingly motivated and with the pyromaniac trait. During his first moments on the island, Kivo founded his very first kingdom and immediately claimed the land as his own. He also built his first warehouse, where he'd begin storing the resources he'd gather over the centuries. Right after that, he confidently headed toward a metal ore deposit near the shore, but upon realizing he didn't have the tools to mine it, he decided to take a nap instead. While Kivo slept, I decided to rename the kingdom he had just founded. Its original name was Porton, but I changed it to something that better reflects how Kivo feels on this island, and I gave it a fitting motto so he wouldn't forget why he's here. He'll be accompanied on this island by a small group of beetles and the occasional bird flying overhead. Eventually, he managed to build his first campfire to get through the darkness and cold nights on the island. And not only that, after a few months, he had already built his first tent and even started laying down pathways to make the kingdom a bit more visually appealing. We've just completed the first 100 years. It's the middle of a rainy season. Kivo doesn't really like being outside, so he only goes out when it's absolutely necessary for a walk, and then heads right back to his tent. That's how he spends the whole day, watching Netflix and chilling. 100 years later, I had quite a scare since I couldn't find Kivo anywhere. The island was going through an intense heat wave, and I honestly thought he might have died from heat stroke until he finally reappeared, gathering a decent amount of food to survive the shortage that was coming. I also noticed he'd built a lot more houses than he had before. I guess he still hasn't fully come to terms with the fact that he's going to be completely alone for several millennia. Either way, we'll let him keep evolving and see how far he goes. Kivo has just reached the 500-year mark, and we can already see major upgrades in his housing. His homes are now fully formed cabins, and there are even new animals appearing around the island, including some blue sheep for some reason. As for Kivo, he's decided to let go of his royal robe, and we're starting to notice signs of aging in his hair. He's also trying to upgrade the only house that still needs improvement, but he doesn't have enough materials, so he just heads back home. We've now reached exactly 1,000 years since the beginning of our story, and it's clear that Kivo has spent most of his time clearing the center of the island of trees and clutter, and taking a few nighttime walks under the moonlight. To be honest, he doesn't do much during the night. He just walks around and then returns home. He doesn't gather resources or do anything particularly interesting, although after one of his walks and a nap on the beach, we discovered that one of his houses had collapsed, so he had to move into another cabin that was closer to the coast. We're now somewhere around the year 2600, about halfway through, and it looks like we've arrived during a harsh winter. The water surrounding the island has completely frozen over, and our protagonist is pretty much just gathering even more resources. Not only that, but he's also managed to build a much larger house, and has finally started mining the metal and stone veins scattered across the map. In fact, during his free time, he's been studying and writing down all the knowledge he's accumulated over these 2,600 years. Once he's done with his daily tasks, he heads back to his hut to keep warm from the cold. And now, we've finally reached the year 4,700. By this point, not only has he gathered the maximum amount of resources possible, but he's also decided to build several roads connecting the houses, giving everything a more organized layout in preparation for the arrival of other humans. One thing's for sure, he hasn't stopped documenting his knowledge in books this entire time. It's time to bring the rest of humanity into the world. We'll place several human groups across the planet so they can begin founding their own kingdoms. Once we've scattered a few around, we'll turn our attention back to Kivo's island and spawn a slightly smaller group there. Right away, I noticed they're using the knowledge Kivo had recorded over the last 4,000 years to build a windmill and support the large number of people now living there. Meanwhile, the other kingdoms are still barely getting started, just now building their first campfires and warehouses. Anyway, the time has come to tear down the wall that separated this island from the rest of the world. And on top of that, we're going to build a small bridge to connect the island with the mainland. Something I find really interesting is how the kids speak about the king with obvious admiration. And honestly, it makes sense considering he's a wise man who's over 4,000 years old. They've also used that ancient knowledge to build a mine, which now allows them to collect minerals way more efficiently. One of the most advanced kingdoms so far is the one located in the enchanted biome. It's the only one that has built a dock and several other structures, including a windmill. The rest are pretty far behind in comparison. It's now been 100 years since humans first arrived, and almost the entire map has been claimed by different kingdoms. Interestingly, near our protagonist's territory, there was a small kingdom called Froisteria that ended up completely surrounded by Kivo's kingdom. They had no choice but to relocate and establish a new settlement far away from their capital. As for the others, Sufionu has become the most populated kingdom in the world, while Kivo's kingdom ranks 4th. But honestly, that's not the most important thing. What really matters is that they've managed to build a library where they can store all of Kivo's writings and even create new books from them. They've also built a marketplace where citizens exchange goods and a training barracks to improve their soldiers' skills. Not long after the first wars broke out, Sufiono decided to attack the kingdom of Boga, seeing them as a growing threat. Meanwhile, Kivo's kingdom went after Froysteria, taking full advantage of their upper hand. I also noticed that Kivo decided to build a settlement in a pretty distant area. However, it's just a secondary village and doesn't seem like it'll play any major role in the kingdom's development. It didn't take long before Kivo's kingdom easily conquered Froysteria and claimed all of their buildings. Back to the war between Sufiono and Boga. It turns out that Sufiono's soldiers are mostly equipped with silver weapons, probably because that region has an abundance of the metal. Still, they shouldn't underestimate the kingdom of Boga. At first, they seemed like the underdogs, but they're now gaining the upper hand both in population and military strength. While that war raged on, Kivo's kingdom made the decision to attack the kingdom of Eris, taking advantage of the fact that, even though Eris had a vast territory, their population was relatively small. Without hesitation, they launched the invasion. However, due to the bombs being thrown by Eris's soldiers, a small squad of Kivo's troops was wiped out. Still, Kivo himself stepped onto the battlefield and set the windmills on fire. Let's not forget, he's a pyromaniac. Shortly after, his troops followed him, and together they managed to conquer the kingdom of Eris completely without much resistance. Surprisingly, the war between Sufiono and Boga was still going, until suddenly Sufiono began to break apart into several independent kingdoms. Seizing the opportunity, Kivo decided to launch an attack on the kingdom of Ifrug, sending in all his troops to gradually wipe out its inhabitants and, sooner rather than later, take over the entire territory. This turned out to be fantastic for Kivo's kingdom because it allowed them to connect the distant settlement they had established far from the capital with the rest of the kingdom. And not just that, they now had an insanely huge stretch of land from one end of the world to the other. But of course, that kind of gain wasn't going to come without consequences. The kingdom of Seronzova, seeing how powerful Kivo had become, decided to strike back. They moved in fast and managed to take over the most vulnerable regions, claiming a large chunk of Kivo's territory. Even so, Kivo made a smart move. He sent his troops to defend against the ongoing invasion, and taking advantage of the distraction, deployed another squad through the north to reclaim the lost land. They even invaded the capital, but it wasn't easy at all. Seronzova's forces were waiting with a whole bunch of bombs. In other news, the kingdom of Sufiono had officially ceased to exist, apparently wiped out by a fire cloud summoned by the king of Boga, which disintegrated what little was left of their territory. Sometime later, Kivo managed to rally enough troops to launch a devastating assault against the kingdom of Seronzova. Drawing on millennia of military knowledge and strategy, he slowly conquered every village in Seronzova's original territory, eventually pushing them into a small northern region, which also fell under Kivo's control. That said, a large portion of Kivo's former territory was now abandoned. Meanwhile, the kingdom of Sherad, seeing the weakened state of Boga, decided to strike with full force. And even though the king of Boga was an incredibly skilled archer, it wasn't enough to withstand the enemy's siege. After a brutal battle, he was ultimately killed. With no king, the kingdom of Boga was doomed to fall before Sherad's might. After capturing most of their land, Sherad finally took the last remaining village. At that point, only two kingdoms remained, Kivo and Sherad. It was just a matter of time before war broke out, or at least until something happened to trigger it. Roughly 50 years went by, during which both kingdoms occupied all the remaining territory, effectively splitting the world in two. Eventually, Kivo's kingdom decided it was time to begin the final showdown. They went straight for Sherad's capital, though I suddenly realized both kingdoms had nearly identical colors, making them impossible to tell apart. So I made a small adjustment and changed Sherad's color to yellow. The northern border was one of the areas hit hardest by the war. On top of that, since it was a jungle biome, the vegetation was extremely dense, making it easy for the fire to spread. Meanwhile, Kivo had learned to cast spells and decided to rain down a few meteors on the northern region of the enemy kingdom, causing massive destruction. It was clear that Kivo's main objective was to conquer the capital first, since that's where the king of Sherad was located, so he sent even more troops. But the situation was complicated due to the pressure coming from enemy ships, and eventually the area was abandoned. A northern region of Sherad's kingdom was also left behind. Taking advantage of this moment of weakness, Kivo's troops tried to capture another portion of land, but they were stopped. Sherad wasn't going down without a fight. However, shortly after, they tried again, and suddenly a unique opportunity presented itself. One of Sharad's towns declared independence. Seizing the moment, Kivo was able to completely wipe out the kingdom of Sharad. This new kingdom, called Feloshur, didn't seem interested in fighting, but Kivo wasn't about to let that slide. He wanted to conquer the entire world for himself. So, after just a few months, and with relentless pressure, he managed to take this kingdom too. And just like that, Kivo proved to be the greatest conqueror the world had ever seen, showing that even if you're outnumbered, if you study enough and prepare for, say, 4,700 years, you can achieve some pretty incredible things in this life.